The hospital was quiet that night when a strange woman was admitted. She was brought in by a nurse, and her presence immediately unsettled everyone in the room. Her face was completely blank, no emotions, no signs of life in her eyes, just an empty, terrifying stare. The nurse who had brought her in didn't say much, only that she had been found wandering the streets in a state of confusion. The woman appeared to be in her mid-30s, her clothes tattered and dirty, as if she had been lost for days. She didn't speak a word. Her gaze remained fixed, her expression completely neutral, making it impossible to tell what she was thinking, or if she was even thinking at all. At first, the staff thought it was just an unusual case, perhaps a patient with some form of trauma, maybe even shock, something that could explain her strange behavior. But as time passed, there was something undeniably wrong about her. The longer they observed her, the more uncomfortable they became. She didn't react to anyone, no change in her expression when the doctors approached, no response when they tried to speak with her. It was as if she was disconnected from the world around her, frozen in a state of apathy. Her skin, though pale, was unnaturally smooth, almost doll-like, with an unsettling perfection that didn't seem possible in a human. The doctors noted that her teeth were impossibly white, too white, sharp, and unnaturally pointed, like something out of a nightmare. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared ahead without ever focusing on anything. Every attempt to gauge her mental state failed. It was as though she wasn't truly there at all. The hospital staff exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Something wasn't right. They couldn't put their finger on it, but a heavy, invisible weight seemed to hang in the air whenever she was near. The usual hustle of the hospital was dimmed by the tension her presence caused. Days turned into weeks, and the woman's behavior remained eerily unchanged. She didn't eat, didn't speak, and didn't sleep. She simply sat there, her vacant stare never wavering, her skin too perfect, too unnaturally still. The staff, once curious, now became increasingly uncomfortable, unsure of what to do with her. There was no diagnosis, no explanation for her strange condition. They could not even place her in any familiar category of mental or physical illness. Then, one evening, something shifted. It started with a quiet but distinct feeling in the air. A doctor, De Larson, entered her room to check on her as usual. The woman was sitting upright on the bed, her gaze fixed forward. But this time, there was something different about the way she was looking at him. Dr. Larson approached cautiously, feeling a cold chill crawl up his spine. Her expression was still empty, but there was an intensity to her eyes now, a strange and unsettling awareness. Before he could say anything, she slowly stood up, moving without a sound, her stiff movements making her seem almost mechanical. The air grew thick with tension, a sense of dread settling over the room. Dr. Larson froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He couldn't look away. Her eyes, though empty, seemed to be locking onto him, watching him closely, as if she knew something he didn't. And then, as if guided by some unseen force, she began to reach up to her face. She lifted her hands to her skin, fingers trembling slightly, and Dr. Larson watched in horror as she slowly started to peel it away. Her fingers worked with deliberate precision, her expression still lifeless. And then, there it was. Her face wasn't real. It wasn't skin at all. It was a mask. Dr. Larson stumbled back, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The mask fell to the floor with a soft thud, revealing her true face. Her true face was a grotesque mess of jagged, sharp teeth, with skin stretched too tight over her skull. Her eyes were blackened, hollow pits that seemed to absorb all light, And her mouth, oh, her mouth, stretched into a horrifying permanent grin, jagged and wide, a grin that never stopped, as if it was a permanent feature, not a smile, but a snarl of pure malevolence. Dr. Larson felt his stomach churn, terror clawing at him as his legs turned to jelly. He could barely move. The woman stood there, motionless, her expressionless face now more monstrous than human. She was something far worse than human. She was a creature of nightmares. Without a word, she dropped the mask to the floor and stood there silently. Her expressionless face returned, as if nothing had changed at all, as if she was simply waiting for something. The doctor could barely breathe. His heart pounded in his chest as he backed away, his legs shaking uncontrollably. The terror he felt was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He rushed out of the room, his mind reeling, but the woman did not follow. She simply stood there, unmoving, as if her terrifying form was meant to stay hidden from everyone. The hospital staff never spoke of her again. Some whispered that she never truly left, that she still lingered in the dark corners of the hospital, waiting. And the doctor, Dr. Larson, well, he never came back to work. No one knew what happened to him after that night, and some say they still hear his screams echoing through the halls on quiet nights. David had always prided himself on his courage, a quality he believed set him apart. So, when whispers of the no-end house began circulating, a haunted house challenge promising a substantial cash reward for those who could navigate its 9 progressively terrifying rooms, his interest was piqued. According to legend, each room was designed to delve deeper into the abyss of human fears, with the final room being a test few could endure. The house itself looked innocuous, a plain structure tucked away on the edge of town. It was the sort of place you might drive past without a second glance, unless you knew the horrors it held. As David approached the darkened front door, a shiver of anticipation ran down his spine. The first room seemed surprisingly mundane, decorated like a typical living room, with soothing music playing softly in the background. But as David stepped into the second room, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Shadows on the walls twisted into monstrous forms, moving as if alive. The air grew colder, the edges of his vision flickering with spectral movements. The third room was crafted to mimic a dense forest under a moonless sky. The trees rustled as if whispering secrets, and the ground felt alive beneath his feet, teeming with the sensation of crawling insects. Each step forward was a battle against the rising tide of fear within him. Room 4 was an abandoned asylum, its halls echoing with the phantom sounds of despair. Stained walls and flickering lights created a tapestry of dread that was almost palpable. Room 5 plunged him into an otherworldly dimension, where gravity seemed to warp and the distant stars watched, like cold, unblinking eyes. By the time David reached the 6th room, the challenge had escalated into a visceral horror. It was a grotesque operating theater, filled with the stench of blood and the ghostly echoes of patients' screams. The 7th room was a pitch-black maze, the darkness so complete it felt like a living entity, smothering and alive with whispered threats. The 8th room assaulted his senses with a cacophony of shrieks and blinding flashes, disorienting him to the point of nausea. When he finally stumbled into the 9th room, he was met with a distorted version of his own bedroom. The walls appeared to bleed, and his reflection in the mirror was a grotesque parody, silently screaming back at him with hollow eyes. Emerging from the no-end house, David was visibly shaken. The journey through those rooms had stripped away his bravado, revealing the fragile reality beneath. The cash prize, once a symbol of victory, now felt like a mere afterthought. He had entered seeking a test of bravery, but left with a profound understanding of his own vulnerabilities, forever changed by the horrors he'd faced. Enjoyed the chills? Like, share, and subscribe. For more spine-tingling tales, join us and never miss a frightful story.